When my straight roommate saw me naked, everything changed. True gay story, never meant for Jake to see me like that. It wasn't planned, wasn't some romantic fantasy I'd been harboring in secret. It was just one of those stupid, mundane accidents that happen when you live with someone for too long and get too comfortable. But that single moment, that split second, when our eyes met and the world seemed to tilt sideways, changed. Absolutely everything between us. We'd been roommates for almost 2 years by then. Jake Martinez had answered my Craigslist ad looking for someone to split rent on a decent 2-bedroom in Brooklyn. And from the moment he'd shown up at the apartment viewing with his easy smile and terrible jokes, I knew we'd get along. He was the kind of guy everyone gravitates toward, athletic without being obsessive about it. Funny without trying too hard, genuine in a way that felt increasingly rare in the city. What I hadn't mentioned in my AD, and what didn't come up in our first few months of living together, was that I was gay. Not because I was ashamed or closeted, been out since college, but because it just never felt relevant. Jake talked about girls sometimes, showed me pictures of dates that went nowhere. I listened like the good friend I was becoming. I kept my own dating life vague and private, meeting guys at bars in the West Village and keeping those worlds carefully separate. Looking back now, I can see how I was protecting something I didn't even know existed yet. How I was building walls around feelings that hadn't fully formed, instincts that whispered warnings I refused to hear. Because falling for your straight roommate, that was a cliche I'd promised myself I'd never become. A painful storyline I'd watched too many friends suffer through to ever want for myself. But life, I was learning, doesn't care much about the promises we make to ourselves. Life has a way of taking our carefully constructed boundaries and smashing them to pieces when we least expect it, leaving us standing in the wreckage wondering how we missed all the warning signs. And for me, that demolition began on a random Tuesday evening in October, when I forgot to lock the bathroom door. I'd been running late for work that morning, rushing through my shower and throwing on clothes in a frantic blur of movement. By the time evening rolled around, all I wanted was to sink into a hot bath and let the tension of the day dissolve into the steam. Jake had mentioned something about working late, and I'd heard him leave around 7. So I felt safe leaving the door unlocked while I retrieved my phone from the bedroom. The bathroom was already full of steam when I stepped out of the tub, water dripping down my skin as I reached for the towel I'd left hanging on the rack. That's when the door opened. Not violently or suddenly, just a normal, everyday opening. Jake coming home earlier than expected and heading straight for the bathroom without thinking to knock. For a moment, we both froze. Him in the doorway, gym bag still slung over his shoulder and his hand still on the doorknob. Me standing there completely exposed, one hand reaching for a towel that suddenly seemed miles away. The steam swirled between us like a living thing, and in that suspended moment, something shifted in his expression that I'd never seen before. It wasn't disgust or embarrassment or even the kind of awkward humor you'd expect from accidentally walking in on someone. It was something deeper, something that made my breath catch in my throat even as my face flushed with mortification. His eyes widened slightly, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. He just stood there, looking at me with an intensity that made my skin feel even more exposed than it already was. Shit, sorry. The words finally burst from him as he jerked backward, nearly tripping over his gym bag in his haste to close the door. The click of the latch seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence, and I stood there for several long seconds, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed the towel with shaking hands and wrapped it around myself, trying to process what had just happened. It was nothing, I told myself firmly. Just an accident, the kind of thing that happens when 2 people share a small apartment. We'd laugh about it later, turn it into one of those funny stories we'd tell at parties. Everything would go back to normal, except as I stood there in the dissipating steam, catching my breath and trying to slow my racing heart. I couldn't shake the memory of how he'd looked at me. Not with the quick glance and immediate averting of eyes you'd expect, but with something that felt almost like recognition. Like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. Something that surprised him as much as it clearly surprised me. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, fully dressed in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, Jake was in the kitchen making what appeared to be stressed tacos. He had a beer open on the counter and was chopping vegetables with more focus than the task really required. His shoulders slightly tense beneath his faded Yankees jersey. "Hey," I said softly, hovering in the doorway and trying to project a casualness I absolutely did not feel. "Sorry about that. I thought you were working late. No? Yeah, my fault." He didn't look up from the cutting board, his knife working through a tomato with surgical precision. Should have knocked. Just wasn't thinking. "Long day, you know?" I know the feeling. I moved into the kitchen, opening the fridge to grab my own beer, even though I wasn't sure drinking was the best idea right now. The cold bottle felt good against my palm, something solid and normal to anchor myself to. "Want help with those?" "Sure." He slid the cutting board toward me, finally meeting my eyes with a smile that almost looked normal. Almost, but not quite. There was something different in the way he looked at me now. A heightened awareness that made the kitchen feel suddenly smaller. "You can handle the peppers if you're brave enough." We fell into our usual rhythm of cooking together, a comfortable dance we'd perfected over hundreds of shared meals. But tonight, every accidental brush of our hands felt electric. Every time we moved around each other in the small kitchen, I was hyper-aware of the space between our bodies, the warmth radiating from his skin. The way his breathing seemed slightly faster than usual. "So," Jake said eventually, taking a long pull from his beer and leaning against the counter in that casual way. He had that somehow always looked effortlessly cool. "We're okay, right?" That was just... these things happen. "No big deal?" "No big deal," I echoed, focusing very intently on slicing a jalapeno into perfect rings. "We're roommates. Accidents happen. Already forgotten." It was a lie, and I think we both knew it. Because the truth was, I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my mind, the look in his eyes, the way time had seemed to slow and stretch, the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. But what was I supposed to say? That I'd felt something pass between us in that steam-filled bathroom, something that had nothing to do with embarrassment, and everything to do with a recognition I couldn't name. We ate our tacos and watched a basketball game, falling back into the easy banter that had always defined our friendship. But I caught him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression thoughtful and slightly confused, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't known existed until now. And every time our eyes met, I felt that same electric jolt, that same sense of standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. The days that followed were strange in ways I couldn't quite articulate. On the surface, everything seemed normal. We still grabbed coffee together before work, still sprawled on the couch for our Friday night movie tradition, still texted each other stupid memes throughout the day. But underneath that normalcy, something had fundamentally changed. Like the apartment itself had shifted slightly off its foundation. Jake started working out at home more often. I'd come home to find him doing push-ups in the living room, his t-shirt riding up to expose the top muscles of his lower back, sweat glistening on his skin. He'd glance up when I walked in, offering that easy grin I'd always loved. But now there was something almost performative about it. Like he was aware of being watched in a way he never had been before, and maybe that's because I was watching. God help me, I couldn't seem to stop. Every casual touch his hand on my shoulder when he reached past me for something. The way he'd sprawl across the couch with his legs taking up more than his fair share of space suddenly felt loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. I found myself noticing things I'd trained myself not to see for 2 years. The way his jeans hung on his hips, the curve of his smile when he laughed at his own jokes, the warmth in his dark eyes when he looked at me. This was dangerous territory, and I knew it. I'd built a good life here, a friendship that mattered more than any fleeting attraction. Jake was straight. He dated women, talked about women, had never given any indication that he thought about men in that way. Whatever I'd thought I'd seen in the bathroom that night was probably just my own wishful thinking, my brain creating meaning where none existed. But then there was the Tuesday night. 3 weeks after the incident, when everything got even more complicated. We were watching some action movie. Empty beer bottles littering the coffee table, and a half-eaten pizza growing cold in its box. Jake was slouched on his end of the couch, and I was on mine. The careful distance between us feeling more significant than it ever had before. The movie reached some explosion-filled climax that neither of us were really paying attention to anymore. And during a particularly loud sequence, Jake shifted closer. Not dramatically, not in any way that would seem intentional. Just a gradual migration that ended with his thigh pressed against mine, his shoulder touching my shoulder, his warmth seeping through the thin fabric of our T-shirts. My breath caught. I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, not daring to move or acknowledge what was happening. But every nerve in my body was screaming with awareness. This wasn't accidental. We'd sat on this couch hundreds of times before, and Jake had never needed to be this close. He was doing this on purpose, testing something, maybe testing both of us. "You cold?" he asked softly, his voice cutting through the movie's soundtrack. "You're tense." "No, I'm fine." The words came out steadier than I felt. Just focused on the movie. "Yeah." There was amusement in his voice now, and something else I couldn't identify. "Because it kinda seems like you're not watching at all." He was right. I had no idea what was happening on screen. Couldn't have told you who the good guys were or what they were fighting about. All I knew was the solid warmth of his body against mine. The smell of his deodorant mixed with something uniquely him. The way my heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Jake," I started, finally turning to look at him, but whatever I'd been planning to say died in my throat. Because he was already looking at me, had probably been looking at me for a while, and the expression on his face was something I'd never seen before. Not quite longing, not quite confusion, but something that combined both and added a layer of vulnerability that made him look younger than his 26 years. "I keep thinking about it," he said quietly. So quietly, I almost missed it under the sound of gunfire from the TV. That night, the bathroom. I can't stop thinking about it. The air between us felt charged, dangerous. I should move away, I thought. Should crack a joke, lighten the moment, restore the safe boundaries we'd always maintained. But I couldn't seem to make myself move, couldn't tear my eyes away from his face, from the nervous energy radiating off him in waves. It was just an accident, I managed, though my voice betrayed how little I believed that anymore. These things happen, do they? He shifted slightly, turning to face me more fully. And now we were so close, I could see the tiny flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could count his eyelashes if I wanted to. Because I've had roommates before, Ethan, and I've walked in on people before, and it never felt like. It never made me... ... He trailed off, frustration flickering across his features as he struggled to find the words. I waited, barely breathing, suspended in this moment that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. One more word, one more admission, and everything would change. There would be no going back, no returning to the safe friendship we'd built. "Made you what?" I whispered, even though part of me was screaming not to ask. Not to push this any further, Jake's hand moved, almost involuntarily, coming to rest on my knee. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent electricity coursing through my entire body. His eyes searched mine, looking for something permission. Maybe your understanding, or just confirmation that he wasn't losing his mind. "Made me wonder," he finally said, his voice rough with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. "Made me wonder what it would be like if... ... The movie exploded into its final action sequence, and the sudden surge of sound broke the spell. Jake jerked back as if electrocuted, his hand leaving my knee so quickly it left a cold spot behind. He ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen him do 1,000 times. But now it looked different, like he was trying to physically shake off whatever had just passed between us. "I should probably go to bed," he said abruptly, standing up and avoiding my eyes. "Early meeting tomorrow. You can finish the movie if you want." Oh, he was gone before I could respond, disappearing into his bedroom and closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any slam. I sat there alone in the blue glow of the television, my heart still racing, and Jake's words echoing in my mind. Made me wonder what it would be like if... ... If what? If he wasn't straight? If I wasn't his roommate? If we crossed that line that neither of us seemed able to stop walking toward? The questions spiraled through my mind as I mechanically cleaned up the living room, gathering bottles and pizza boxes, while my thoughts churned with a mixture of hope and terror. The next few weeks were a masterclass in unresolved tension. Jake threw himself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. When he was home, he was polite but distant, giving me space I hadn't asked for and didn't want. We stopped cooking together, stopped watching movies, stopped doing all the small domestic things that had made our apartment feel like home. I tried to give him the space he seemed to need, tried to respect whatever internal struggle he was clearly going through. But it hurt more than I'd expected, this sudden coldness from someone who'd become one of my closest friends. I'd catch glimpses of the old Jake, sometimes a smile when I said something particularly stupid, a laugh that escaped before he could suppress it, but then he'd remember himself and pull back. Rebuilding the walls as fast as I tried to scale them, my friends noticed the change. Over drinks at our usual bar in the village, Marcus leaned across the table with a knowing look that made me want to flee. So are we going to talk about what's obviously eating you alive? Or are we going to keep pretending everything's fine? Everything is fine, I said automatically, taking a long drink of my beer. Just work stress. The usual, Jasmine, Marcus's husband, gave me the look that meant he wasn't buying any of my bullshit. This wouldn't have anything to do with the mysterious roommate you never let us meet. The straight one you definitely don't have feelings for? I don't have feelings for Jake, I protested, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. He's my friend. My straight friend. End of story. Marcus and Jasmine exchanged one of those married couple looks that communicated entire conversations without words. Sweetie, Marcus said gently, reaching across to squeeze my hand. I've known you for 7 years. I've seen you through bad breakups and worse dates. And I've never seen you this miserable over someone you supposedly don't have feelings for. I wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the fiction I'd been building so carefully. But sitting there with 2 of my oldest friends, in a bar where I'd always felt safe to be exactly who I was, the defenses crumbled. It doesn't matter if I have feelings for him. He's straight. And even if he wasn't, I live with him. It would be a disaster, would it though? Jasmine asked thoughtfully, swirling the wine in his glass. You 2 already live together, already know each other's worst habits. You've built in compatibility testing. And as for him being straight, ... He shrugged elegantly. Sexuality isn't always as fixed as people think. Maybe he's questioning. Maybe he's been questioning for a while and you just gave him something concrete to question about. The possibility had been circling my thoughts for weeks, but hearing it said out loud made it feel simultaneously more real and more terrifying. Even if that's true, I can't be the person who ... I mean, if he's figuring things out, the last thing he needs is his roommate complicating everything. Or maybe, Marcus said softly, you're exactly what he needs. Someone he trusts. Someone he already cares about. That's not a complication, Ethan. That's a gift. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that this terrifying freefall I'd been in for weeks might actually lead somewhere good, instead of just crashing and burning. But I'd seen too many stories of unrequited feelings and ruined friendships to let myself hope too much. Hope, I'd learned, was often just another word for eventual heartbreak. But life has a way of forcing confrontations we're trying to avoid. It happened on a Saturday night when Jake came home from what I'd assumed was a date. I was camped out on the couch with my laptop, half-heartedly working on a project that was due Monday. When I heard his key in the lock, he looked good dressed in dark jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the warm tones in his skin. His hair styled in that casually perfect way that probably took him 20 minutes to achieve. But his expression was stormy, frustrated in a way that immediately put me on alert. Hey, I said carefully, closing my laptop. How was your night? Fine. He kicked off his shoes with more force than necessary and stalked to the kitchen, emerging moments later with a beer that he opened with aggressive efficiency. Great. Fucking fantastic. This wasn't like Jake. He was usually so even-tempered, the calm one who talked me down when I spiraled into anxiety. Seeing him like this angry and bitter and radiating frustration was jarring enough that I stood up without thinking, moving toward him with concern overriding my self-preservation instincts. What happened? I asked gently. Do you want to talk about it? What happened? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. What happened is, I spent 3 hours with a perfectly nice, perfectly attractive woman who I have absolutely no interest in. What happened is I sat across from her at dinner and couldn't stop thinking about. He cut himself off, taking a long drink of beer and looking anywhere but at me. My heart was pounding. Thinking about what? Nothing. Forget it. He tried to move past me, but I stepped into his path, blocking his escape route. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes at me, at himself, the situation, but underneath it, I could see something that looked a lot like fear. Jake, I kept my voice soft, non-threatening. Talk to me, please. Whatever this is, whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to do it alone, don't I? The words came out harsh, accusatory, because it feels like I'm very much alone in this. It feels like I'm losing my mind and you're just... You're just going about your life like nothing's changed. Nothing's changed? I couldn't help the incredulous laugh that escaped. Jake, everything's changed. You've been avoiding me for weeks. We barely talk anymore. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what I want either. The admission burst from him like a dam breaking. Suddenly he was in motion, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. That's the problem. I don't know what I want, what I'm feeling, what any of this means. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you, and it's driving me crazy. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. Jake stopped pacing, his back to me, his shoulders rising and falling with heavy breaths. I stood frozen, afraid that any movement might shatter this moment, might send him retreating back behind his walls, before we could finally have this conversation we've been dancing around for weeks. What are you thinking about? I asked quietly. When you think about me, he turned slowly, and the expression on his face was so raw, so vulnerable, that it physically hurt to look at. Everything. I think about everything. The way you laugh at your own jokes before you even get to the punchline. The way you hum while you cook. The way you look in the morning before you've fully woken up, took a shaky breath. The way you looked in the bathroom that night, my breath caught. We'd never spoken about it directly, had been carefully avoiding any mention of that night like it was a live grenade. But now it was out in the open, and there was no going back. I see you everywhere, Jake continued, his voice getting rougher, more desperate, even when you're not there. Even when I'm on a date with someone else, trying to feel something, anything normal, but nothing feels normal anymore. You've ruined normal for me? I moved toward him without consciously deciding to, pulled by something stronger than logic or self-preservation. Jake, tell me I'm not crazy. He reached out suddenly, his hands gripping my shoulders with an intensity that made me gasp. We were so close now, close enough that I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The terror and want and confusion, all tangled together. Tell me you feel this too, whatever this is. Because if I'm imagining it, if this is all in my head, I need to know so I can figure out how to get over it. If you're not imagining it. The words came out as barely a whisper, but they landed like a shout in the quiet apartment. I feel it too. I've felt it since that night. Maybe even before that. I don't know anymore. Something in his expression cracked open, relief and fear washing over his features in equal measure. His hands moved from my shoulders to my face, cupping my jaw with a gentleness that contradicted the intensity of his grip moments before. His thumbs brushed across my cheekbones, and I couldn't help but lean into the touch, my eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. He stopped, swallowed hard. I've never felt like this about a guy before. Never even thought about it. And now I can't think about anything else. You don't have to have it all figured out, I said, covering his hands with mine. You don't have to put a label on it or know what it means. We can take it slow. Figure it out together. I'm scared, he admitted, and hearing those words from someone usually so confident made my heart ache. I'm scared of screwing this up. Of losing you as a friend. Of not knowing how to be what you need. You already are what I need. I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze directly. You have been for a long time. This doesn't have to change everything. It can just be ... more. He was breathing fast now, his eyes dropping to my lips and then back to my eyes, asking a question he couldn't quite voice. The air between us felt combustible, like one wrong move would set everything ablaze. I stayed perfectly still, letting him process, letting him decide. I started, then stopped, frustration flickering across his face. Fuck! I don't even know how to ask. Yes, I said simply, answering the question he hadn't quite asked. Whatever it is, yes. He kissed me, or I kissed him. Or we kissed each other simultaneously, our mouths meeting in a collision that was equal parts desperate and gentle. His lips were softer than I'd imagined during all those nights I'd tried not to imagine exactly this. He tasted like beer and mint and something indefinably Jake. And the small sound he made when I pressed closer sent electricity down my spine. For a moment, we stayed like that, kissing softly, carefully, like we were both afraid the other might disappear. His hands were still cupping my face. Mine had somehow found their way to his waist, feeling the warmth of his skin through his shirt. It was perfect and terrifying, and everything I'd been trying not to want for months. Then something shifted. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and Jake's hands slid into my hair, gripping tightly as he pulled me impossibly closer. I made a sound I'd never heard from myself before, something between a gasp and a moan, and felt him smile against my lips. We stumbled backward, Jake's back hitting the wall with a soft thud that neither of us really noticed. His hands were everywhere now, my shoulders, my back, sliding under my t-shirt to find bare skin, and I was drowning in sensation, in the feeling of finally touching him the way I'd been aching to. But then he pulled back abruptly, breathing hard, his eyes wide with something that looked like panic. Wait. He pressed his palms against my chest, not pushing me away exactly, but creating distance. This is moving too fast. I need to think. Reality crashed back in, cold and sobering. Of course he needed to think. This was all new for him. Overwhelming in ways I couldn't fully understand because I'd been carrying these feelings for weeks while he was just now confronting them. I stepped back immediately, giving him space, trying to ignore the way my body was screaming at the loss of contact. You're right, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos inside me. I'm sorry. We should. Don't apologize. He ran his hands through his hair, leaving it beautifully disheveled. God, please don't apologize. This is... I wanted that. I want that. I just need to understand what it means. Doesn't have to mean anything yet, I offered, even though that felt like a lie. It already meant everything to me, but I couldn't put that weight on him right now. We can just see what happens. No pressure. He nodded slowly, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. The beginning of overthinking that would probably keep him up all night. I'm going to go to my room for a bit. Not because I want to get away from you, just because I need to process. Okay. I forced a smile that felt more natural than I expected. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. He started toward his bedroom, then paused in the doorway, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Ethan, that was really good. Just so you know, the kissing, it was really good. Then he was gone, his door closing softly behind him, leaving me standing in the living room with kiss, swollen lips, and a heart that was racing so fast I felt lightheaded. I sank onto the couch, touching my mouth with wondering fingers, replaying every second of what had just happened. We'd crossed the line. There was no going back now, no returning to the safe friendship we'd had before. Whatever happened next would either bring us closer together or tear us completely apart. And as I sat there in the quiet apartment, I realized I was willing to risk everything for the chance of more moments like that. The next morning was awkward in ways I'd anticipated but hadn't fully prepared for. Jake emerged from his room, looking rumpled and tired, like he'd spent the night wrestling with his thoughts instead of sleeping. We moved around each other carefully in the kitchen, making coffee and toast with the kind of exaggerated politeness usually reserved for strangers. So, I finally said, unable to take the tension anymore, "Are we going to talk about last night, or are we going to pretend it didn't happen?" Jake took a long sip of his coffee, buying time. I don't want to pretend it didn't happen, but I also don't know what to say about it. I haven't figured it out yet. You don't have to have it all figured out, I reminded him gently. This isn't a test. There's no right answer you're supposed to find. Isn't there, though? He set his mug down with more force than necessary, because it feels like there should be. Like I should know whether I'm gay or bi, or just confused or what. Like I should have some grand revelation that explains everything. Sexuality isn't always that clean, I said, leaning against the counter and trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. Some people know for sure from the beginning. Others figure it out gradually. Some people's understanding of themselves changes over time. There's no wrong way to do this. But what if I... He stopped, frustration evident in every line of his body. What if I'm just attracted to you specifically? What if this doesn't mean I'm interested in other men? Just you? Is that even a thing? It's definitely a thing, I assured him. And if that's what this is, that's okay. You don't have to be attracted to all men to be attracted to one man. Labels are useful for some people, but they're not mandatory. He absorbed this silently, staring into his coffee like it held answers I couldn't provide. I wanted to cross the kitchen and pull him into my arms, wanted to kiss away the worry lines on his forehead and promise him everything would be okay. But he needed space to work through this, and the best thing I could do was give him that space. I have to go to work, he said finally, rinsing his mug and setting it in the sink. But I'm not. I'm not running away from this. From you. I just need some time to think. Take all the time you need, I said, even as a small voice in my head whispered that too much time might mean him talking himself out of whatever this was between us. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, and looked back at me with such open vulnerability that it made my chest ache. I'm glad it was you, he said quietly. If I was going to have some kind of sexuality crisis, I'm glad it's with someone I trust. Someone who matters. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with those words echoing in the empty apartment. Jake spent the next week in what privately called research mode. Read articles about sexual fluidity and coming out late in life. He watched YouTube videos from people sharing their experiences of discovering their sexuality as adults. He even, I discovered later, called his older sister and had a long, emotional conversation about questioning everything he thought he knew about himself. Through it all, he kept me at arm's length, not cold exactly, but carefully maintaining a physical distance that felt conspicuous after weeks of unconscious gravitating toward each other. We talked, but our conversations had a cautious quality, like we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing and shattering this fragile new dynamic. It was during this limbo period that Marcus insisted I come out to a club in Hell's Kitchen. You need to get out of that apartment, he'd said firmly. You need to remember there are other men in this city. Men who know what they want and aren't having existential crises about it. I knew he was right. Even if the last thing I wanted was to go out and pretend to have fun while my entire emotional life was in chaos. But staying home and pining wasn't healthy either. So I found myself in a crowded club on a Friday night. Nursing a drink and trying to look like I was enjoying myself. That's when I ran into Daniel. We'd dated briefly a year ago, a few months before Jake moved in. It had been casual, and ultimately fizzled out due to mutual lack of serious interest. But we'd parted on good terms. Now, seeing him across the club looking unfairly good in a tight black shirt, I felt nothing but a mild appreciation for his aesthetic appeal and a strange sense of how much I'd changed since we'd been together. Ethan. He appeared at my elbow with that easy charm I'd once found so attractive. It's been forever. How are you? We fell into conversation, catching up on the last year of our lives. He'd gotten a promotion, moved to a new apartment, started seriously dating someone before it fell apart spectacularly. I kept my own updates vague, not quite ready to put words to the complicated situation with Jake. We should dance, Daniel suggested after we'd talked for a while, gesturing toward the crowded floor. For old time's sake. I hesitated, but Marcus caught my eye from across the room and made an encouraging gesture that clearly said, "Stop being pathetic and have some fun." So I let Daniel lead me onto the floor. Let myself get lost in the music and the movement and the temporary escape from overthinking everything. It was nice. In an uncomplicated way, Daniel was a good dancer, and being in his arms reminded me of a simpler time when my feelings weren't all tangled up in my living situation. We moved together easily, the familiar comfort of two people who'd once known each other's bodies. Even if that knowledge had faded with time. I didn't see Jake enter the club. Didn't notice him scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on me and Daniel, pressed close on the dance floor. Didn't see the expression that crossed his face, hurt and jealousy, and something that looked like resignation before he turned and disappeared back into the night. I only found out about it later, after I'd come home feeling better than I had in days, ready to tell Jake that I'd had some perspective and realized we could figure this out together. That's when I saw him sitting on the couch in the dark, still fully dressed, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his phone screen. "You're still up?" I said, surprised. It was past 2 in the morning, and Jake was usually an early two-bed person. "Everything okay?" "Fine." His voice was flat, emotionless in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "How was your night?" "It was good, actually. I ran into an ex-Daniel we used to date before you moved in. It was nice catching up. Reminded me that I stopped, finally registering his tone and body language. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." He stood up abruptly, pocketing his phone. "I'm glad you had a good time. You should definitely call him. He seemed like your type." Understanding crashed over me. "Jake, were you at the club?" "Did you see? I was meeting some friends there," he said, his words clipped and careful. "Saw you on the dance floor? You looked like you were having fun, so I didn't want to interrupt." The jealousy in his voice would have been flattering if it wasn't mixed with so much hurt. I moved toward him, but he stepped back, maintaining that careful distance. It wasn't like that. "Daniel and I are an ancient history. We were just dancing." "You don't owe me an explanation," Jake said, but his eyes told a different story. "We're not together. You can dance with whoever you want." "You're right. I can," I agreed, fighting to keep my frustration in check. "But I'm trying to explain anyway, because you're clearly upset, and I care about how you feel. I went out because Marcus made me, because I was going crazy sitting around waiting for you to figure out what you want. Dancing with Daniel didn't mean anything. And what if it had meant something?" Jake's voice rose slightly, the careful control cracking. "What if you'd gone home with him? Would that have meant something?" "I didn't go home with him," I pointed out. "I came home here to you, but you could have." He ran his hands through his hair in that gesture of frustration I knew so well. "And maybe you should have. Because what am I doing? I'm keeping you in limbo while I figure my shit out, and that's not fair to you. You should be able to date, to meet people who know what they want." "Jake, I saw you with him," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "And you looked so easy together. So natural. And I realized I don't even know how to be that with you because I'm still figuring out how to be that with myself." The pain in his voice cut through my frustration, replacing it with something softer and more careful. I took a step toward him, and this time he didn't move away. "I don't need easy," I said quietly. "I don't need natural. I just need honest, and if you're not ready for this, if you need more time, then tell me that. But don't push me away because you're scared or because you saw me dancing with someone who doesn't matter." "How can you say he doesn't matter?" Jake's eyes were bright with unshed tears now, and seeing him like this vulnerable and hurting made my chest physically ache. "You have history with him. He knows who he is, what he wants. He doesn't need to figure himself out at your expense." "But I don't want him," I said, closing the distance between us and taking his face in my hands the way he'd done to me that night we'd kissed. "I want you." Confused, questioning, figuring it out you. That's who I want. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch, and I could feel the tension warring with longing in his body. What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm never sure enough, never ready enough? "Then we'll figure that out when we get there," I promised. "But right now in this moment, I need you to tell me what you want. Not what you think you should want, or what would be easier or safer. What you actually want." He opened his eyes, and the look in them was answer enough even before he spoke. "You," he whispered. "I want you. I'm terrified and confused, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want you." This kiss was different from the first one. Less desperate, more deliberate. A choice we were both making with full awareness of what it meant and what it would cost. His arms came around me, pulling me close. I could feel him, his trembling slightly against me, fear and desire and relief, all mixed together. We stood there in the dark living room, holding each other like lifelines, and I felt something click into place that I hadn't even known was misaligned. This was real. Messy and complicated and scary, but real in a way that mattered more than easy ever could. When we finally pulled apart, Jake rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know the rules or the timeline or anything." "Neither do I said honestly. "This is new territory for both of us. We'll make it up as we go." "What if I mess it up?" "Then we'll unmess it. Together." I pulled back slightly to look at him properly. "But Jake, you have to promise me something. No more pushing me away when you get scared. No more deciding for me what I can or can't handle. If this is going to work, we have to be honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what I was asking. "I promise. No more running. Even when I want to, which will probably be often because I'm apparently terrible at emotions." I laughed, the sound breaking some of the remaining tension. "You're not terrible at emotions. You're just new at these particular emotions. There's a difference." "Is this when you tell me there's going to be a learning curve?" "Oh, definitely," I assured him. "A huge learning curve. I'm talking months, possibly years of me teaching you proper queer culture, and you awkwardly trying to figure out how to introduce me to your family." Something shifted in his expression at that. Something vulnerable, but also hopeful. "You think we'll make it to the meeting the family stage?" "I think," I said carefully, "that if we're both willing to put in the work and be patient with each other, we could make it to any stage we want." He kissed me again. Softer this time, full of a tenderness that made my heart swell. "I'm going to be really bad at this at first," he warned between kisses. "I'm going to say the wrong things and probably internalize a lot of heteronormative bullshit I didn't even know I had." "I know," I said, smiling against his lips. "And I'm going to be patient with you while you unlearn it. Mostly patient. Sometimes I'll probably get frustrated and we'll fight about it. I'm okay with fighting if we also get to do this." He murmured, his hands sliding up my back in a way that made me shiver. "We can definitely do this," I agreed, pulling him closer. "Among other things." "Other things." His voice dropped lower, taking on a note of curiosity mixed with nervousness. "Like what kinds of other things?" "Like the kinds of things that maybe we should discuss when it's not 2 a.m. and we're both emotionally exhausted," I suggested, even as my body disagreed vehemently with my sensible words. Jake groaned, but stepped back, running his hands through his already disheveled hair. "You're right. We should probably talk about expectations and boundaries and all that stuff before we... He gestured vaguely, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Before we what?" I teased, enjoying his discomfort maybe more than I should have. "Use your words, Jake. Before we do things that require more than kissing," he said, the flush spreading down his neck in a way I found absolutely endearing. "See, I'm already terrible at this. I don't even know what to call it. I'll work on your vocabulary," I promised. Among other things, the next few weeks were a study in navigating uncharted territory. Jake approached, figuring out his sexuality with the same methodical focus he brought to everything else in his life, researching, asking questions, occasionally having small panic attacks when the weight of his changing self-understanding became overwhelming. We took things slowly. At his pace, some nights we'd watch TV on the couch, gradually migrating closer until we were wrapped around each other, content with just the closeness. Other times we'd talk for hours about what this meant, what he was feeling, how to reconcile this new part of himself with the identity he'd carried for 26 years. I keep thinking about all the times I might have been attracted to guys before. He told me one night as we lay tangled together on his bed, fully clothed, but intimate in a way that went beyond physical. Wondering if I missed the signs or if this really is new. "Does it matter?" I asked, running my fingers through his hair in a way that made him practically purr. "Whether you've always been bi or pan or whatever label fits, or whether something shifted recently." "I guess not," he admitted. "It just feels like I should have known. Like there should have been some big revelation instead of just... Gradually realizing I was attracted to you specifically, and then having to figure out what that meant about everything else. Sexuality can be fluid, I reminded him. It's not always a fixed thing you discover once and then that's it. Some people's attractions shift over time, or they become aware of attractions they hadn't noticed before. He was quiet for a moment, processing. Do you think I'm attracted to other men? Or just you? It was a question he'd asked in various forms multiple times, and I understood why it mattered to him, even if I didn't have a definitive answer. I don't know, I said honestly. And I don't think you'll know until you're in situations where you can observe your reactions. But Jake, it's okay either way. If you're only attracted to me, that's valid. If you realize you're attracted to other men too, that's also valid. What if I realize I'm actually gay? The question came out small, scared. What if this attraction to you opens some door and I realize I never actually liked women at all, that I was just ... I don't know, following the script? Then you'll figure that out, I said gently. And it'll be okay. Scary probably, and definitely complicated, but okay. You don't have to have all the answers right now. He pulled me closer, burying his face in the crook of my neck. This is so much harder than I thought it would be. Not the US part that's surprisingly easy. But the figuring out who I am part is exhausting. I know, I murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. But you're doing great. Better than you think. We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other in the darkness of his bedroom. I felt a contentment I'd never experienced in any of my previous relationships. This thing with Jake's messy and uncertain, as it was, felt more real than anything I'd had before. But of course, the universe couldn't let us exist in our little bubble forever. The first test came when Jake's best friend from college, Ryan, announced he was coming to visit for the weekend. Jake had mentioned me to Ryan before his cool roommate, who he got along with great but obviously hadn't disclosed the recent developments in our relationship. What do I tell him? Jake asked anxiously as we cleaned the apartment in preparation for Ryan's arrival. Do I tell him about us? Do I come out? Do I just pretend everything's normal? What do you want to do? I countered, wiping down the kitchen counter. This is your coming out journey. You get to control how and when and to whom. I want to tell him, Jake said after a pause. I think he's my best friend. I should be able to tell him. But I'm scared of how he'll react. Has he ever said anything that makes you think he'd be unsupportive? No, nothing like that. He's always been cool about LGBTQ+ stuff in general. But it's different when it's your friend, you know? When it's me, instead of some abstract concept, I set down my cleaning supplies and went to him, pulling him into a hug. If you want to tell him I support that, if you want to wait, I support that too. And if you tell him and he reacts badly, we'll deal with it together. Jake held me tightly for a moment, then pulled back with a determined expression. I'm going to tell him. It's time to start being honest about who I am, even when it's scary. Ryan arrived Friday evening. A tall guy with an easy laugh and the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to question his place in the world. He and Jake fell into their familiar rhythm immediately, trading inside jokes and memories from their college days. I hung back initially, giving them space to catch up. But Ryan kept pulling me into the conversation with questions and genuine interest. We ordered pizza and started into the beer Ryan had brought. For a while, it felt almost normal. Just three guys hanging out on a Friday night, nothing complicated or earth-shattering about it. But I could see the tension building in Jake's shoulders as the evening wore on. Could practically hear him psyching himself up for the conversation he'd decided to have. It finally came up after. Ryan asked about Jake's dating life. So are you still on all those apps? Meeting anyone interesting? Jake glanced at me, and something in that look must have registered with Ryan because his expression shifted to curiosity. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. About dating, about some things that have changed. Ryan set down his beer, his attention fully focused on Jake now. Okay, I'm listening. So the thing is, Jake took a deep breath, and I could see his hands shaking slightly. I've been figuring some stuff out about myself lately. About my sexuality, to Ryan's credit, his expression didn't change beyond a slight raising of his eyebrows. Okay, what kind of stuff? I think I might be bi, Jake said, the words coming out in a rush. Or pan, or something in that area. I'm still figuring out the specifics, but basically, I'm attracted to men. Or at least two. He glanced at me again. Two Ethan specifically, and possibly other men too. I'm not entirely sure yet. The silence that followed felt eternal, even though it probably lasted only a few seconds. Ryan looked between Jake and me, understanding dawning on his face. So you two are... ... Together, I supplied, when Jake seemed unable to find the words. We're together, huh? Ryan leaned back, processing this information. I couldn't read his expression, and from the tension radiating off Jake, he couldn't either. Then slowly, a smile spread across Ryan's face. That's actually really cool, man. I'm happy for you. The relief that washed over Jake was almost palpable. Really? You're okay with it? Why wouldn't I be? Ryan looked genuinely confused by the question. You're my best friend. If you're happy, I'm happy. And honestly, it makes sense. You two have always had this weird chemistry thing going on. I just thought you were really good friends. You were, Jake said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. We are. It just evolved into something more. Ryan raised his beer in a toast. Well, congratulations on the evolution and on having the guts to figure yourself out. I know that can't be easy. We clinked bottles, and just like that, the moment passed. The conversation moved on to other topics, but something had fundamentally shifted. Jake had come out to his best friend, and the world hadn't ended. If anything, his relief and happiness made the rest of the evening lighter. Freer later. After Ryan had gone to sleep on the pull-out couch, and Jake and I were getting ready for bed in his room, we'd been sleeping in the same bed for a couple weeks now, though we hadn't quite progressed beyond kissing and some exploratory touching. Jake pulled me into a tight embrace. Thank you, he whispered into my hair. For what? For being patient with me. For being here while I figure this out. For being worth figuring it out for. I pulled back to look at him, seeing the emotion shining in his eyes. Jake, you don't have to thank me for that. This isn't some favor I'm doing you. I'm here because I want to be. Because being with you makes me happier than I've been in a long time. He kissed me then, deep and tender, full of gratitude and affection, and something that might have been love. Though neither of us had said that word yet, when we finally fell asleep, wrapped around each other with Ryan snoring softly in the living room, I felt like we'd crossed some important threshold. Coming out to Ryan had been Jake's first real step into living authentically, and it had gone well. If only everything could be that easy. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. Jake's parents called to announce they were coming to visit New York, wanting to spend a weekend seeing their son and meeting his mysterious roommate they'd heard so much about. Under normal circumstances, this would be fine. I was used to meeting partners' families, and Jake had always spoken fondly of his parents, but these weren't normal circumstances. Jake had only recently come to terms with his sexuality, had only just started identifying as bisexual after weeks of questioning. He'd successfully come out to Ryan, but his parents were a different matter entirely. From what he'd told me, they were traditional in many ways, not hostile to LGBTQ+ people, but not particularly exposed to or educated about queer issues either. I don't know if I can do this, Jake said, pacing our living room the night before his parents were set to arrive. I don't know if I can pretend we're just roommates for an entire weekend, but I also don't know if I'm ready to tell them. What if they react badly? What if it changes everything? Hey, breathe. I caught him mid-pace, pulling him to a stop. You don't have to decide anything right now. We can play it by ear, see how things feel. If the moment feels right to tell them, we will. If it doesn't, we won't. There's no deadline on coming out to your parents. But I don't want to lie to them, he said miserably. I don't want to pretend you're not important to me. That feels worse than just telling them the truth. It's not lying, I assured him. It's choosing when and how to share important information. Those are different things. But I could see he wasn't convinced, and truthfully, I wasn't either. The thought of spending an entire weekend pretending to be just Jake's roommate, maintaining careful physical distance and censoring how we looked at each other, felt suffocating. But it was Jake's choice to make, his coming out to navigate. and I couldn't push him into something he wasn't ready for. His parents arrived Saturday morning, and I immediately understood why Jake was so conflicted. His mother was warm and enthusiastic, pulling me into a hug within minutes of meeting me and telling me she was so glad Jake had found such a good friend and roommate. His father was more reserved, but clearly kind, asking thoughtful questions about my work and interests. They were good people. That was clear within the first hour. But they were also people who assumed their son was straight, who asked about whether he was dating anyone with the kind of casual certainty that comes from never having to question heteronormative assumptions. And I watched Jake navigate those questions with an increasingly strained smile. Deflecting and changing the subject while I played the role of supportive roommate, it hurt more than I'd expected. Not because I thought we should be openly affectionate in front of his parents, understood the complicated dynamics at play, but because I could see how much the pretending was costing Jake, how every casual touch he had to remember not to make, every endearment he had to swallow, added weight to his shoulders. We made it through Saturday with careful choreography, separate bedrooms, maintained distance, friendly, but not too friendly interactions. Jake's parents seemed delighted with me as a roommate in person, commenting multiple times on how well we got along and how nice it was that Jake had found such good people in New York. Sunday morning, though the careful facade began to crack, we were having breakfast at a diner. Jake's mother was telling a story about him as a child when Jake reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was unconscious, automatic, the kind of small, affectionate gesture we'd gotten used to over the past weeks. His mother's story faltered mid-sentence as her eyes dropped to our joined hands. Jake realized what he'd done almost immediately, yanking his hand back and stammering something about ... I don't even know what. The damage was done. You could see the questions forming in his mother's eyes, the pieces clicking together in her mind. His father's expression was harder to read, but there was definitely a new awareness in how he looked between us. Jake, his mother said slowly, carefully, "Is there something you want to tell us?" The silence that followed was excruciating. I could see Jake warring with himself, the desire to be honest fighting against fear of rejection. The weight of a lifetime of being one way, now having to explain how he'd become something different. His hands were shaking where they rested on the table, and I wanted desperately to take them in mine, to offer comfort and support, but I couldn't, not yet. Not until he decided what he wanted to do. "Mom, Dad," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Ethan isn't just my roommate. He's we're together. We're dating. I'm bisexual." His mother's hand flew to her mouth, shock written plainly across her features. His father's expression remained carefully neutral, unreadable. The other diners continued their meals around us, oblivious to the world-altering moment happening at our table. "How long?" his mother asked once she'd recovered from the initial shock. "How long have you known?" "Not long," Jake admitted. "A couple of months, really. It's been a process of figuring things out, and you..." His father's gaze shifted to me, not hostile exactly, but evaluating in a way that made me feel incredibly exposed. "How do you fit into this?" "I care about your son very much," I said, keeping my voice steady and respectful. "I have for a while now, and I've been supporting him as he's been figuring out this part of himself." Supporting him. His mother's voice had an edge now, something sharp beneath the shock. Or influencing him. "Jake has never shown any interest in men before. He's had girlfriends. He's always been ... straight." Jake cut in, and there was a note of defiance in his voice I'd never heard before. "I thought I was too, Mom, but I was wrong. Or things changed. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know how I feel. And I feel this way about Ethan." His father was still silent, his expression unreadable. Somehow that felt more dangerous than his mother's vocal shock. Finally, he spoke. "This is a lot to process, Jake. You have to understand, this comes as a complete surprise to us." "I know," Jake said miserably. "I'm sorry. I didn't plan for you to find out like this. I wanted to tell you when I was ready, in my own way." "Are you sure about this?" his mother asked. And I could hear both concern and something like hope in her voice, hope that maybe this was a phase, the confusion that would pass. Maybe you're just going through something, questioning things because of stress, or I'm sure, Mom. Jake's voice was firm now, certain. I know this is hard for you to understand, and I know it's not what you expected. But this is who I am. Ethan is who I want to be with. And I need you to accept that, or at least try to accept it. The breakfast ended shortly after that, the food growing cold on our plates as we all sat in uncomfortable silence. We paid the check and walked back to the apartment with his parents. The usual chatter and warmth replaced by a heavy quiet that felt like a physical weight at the apartment. Jake's father finally spoke more than a few words. Son, we're going to head back to the hotel. We need some time to process this.
Ow.
Okay, Jake said quietly. He looked defeated, smaller than I'd ever seen him. His mother hugged him at the door, holding on a little too long. We love you, she whispered. Whatever else happens, we love you. We just need time. They left, and Jake stood in the doorway staring after them for a long moment before slowly closing the door. When he turned to face me, there were tears streaming down his face. Hey, I said softly, pulling him into my arms. It's okay. It's going to be okay. They looked at me like they didn't know me, he choked out between sobs. Like I was a stranger. My mom asked if you were influencing me, like I'm not capable of knowing my own feelings. They're in shock, I said, rubbing his back in soothing circles. They need time to adjust their understanding of who you are. But you heard your mom. They love you. That's not going away. What if it does? He pulled back to look at me, his eyes red and frightened. What if they can't accept this? What if I have to choose between them and you? Then you choose you, I said firmly. You choose what makes you happy, what feels authentic. Your parents love you, Jake. In time, I really believe they'll come around. But even if they don't, you can't live your life for them. You have to live it for yourself. He kissed me then, desperate and clinging, like I was an anchor in a storm. And maybe I was. Maybe we both were, for each other, trying to stay afloat in waters neither of us had navigated before. The next few days were tense. Jake's parents returned to their home upstate without further conversation, and Jake spiraled into anxiety about what their silence meant. He drafted and deleted countless texts, picked up his phone to call dozens of times without actually doing it, and generally made himself miserable with worry. Maybe I should have waited, he said one night as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Maybe I should have told them in a different way, given them more time to prepare. There's no perfect way to come out, I reminded him gently. No perfect timing. You told them the truth when the moment arrived, and that took courage. Doesn't feel very courageous, he muttered. Feels like I ruined everything. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. We both tensed, and I could feel his fear about looking at it, about whatever message might be waiting. Finally, he reached for it, the screen illuminating his face in the darkness. It's my dad, he said, his voice tight. He wants to talk tomorrow. Both of them do. They're coming back to the city. Okay, I said, taking his hand and squeezing it. That's good. That means they want to work through this, not just avoid it. Or they want to tell me they can't accept it in person. But despite his words, I could hear the small note of hope creeping into his voice. Jake's parents arrived the next evening, and the apartment had never felt smaller. We all sat in the living room, Jake and me on the couch, his parents in the chairs we'd pulled in from the kitchen. The silence was heavy with anticipation. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Jake's father finally said, and talking, and honestly, a fair bit of reading. Your mother found some resources online about parents of LGBTQ+ children. I did, his mother confirmed, offering a small, tentative smile. There's a whole organization called PFLAG. Did you know that? They have information for parents learning to support their queer children. Jake shook his head, clearly not trusting himself to speak yet. The thing is, his father continued, we spent 26 years with certain expectations and assumptions about who you were and who you'd become. That's on us. We shouldn't have made assumptions. But changing those assumptions isn't something that happens instantly. It takes time. We love you, his mother cut in, her voice thick with emotion. That's the most important thing, Jake. We love you, and nothing about that has changed or will change. But we're also human, and we're processing a lot right now. We have questions, his father admitted. Probably questions that will make you uncomfortable or frustrated. But we're asking them because we want to understand, not because we're trying to change you or convince you of anything. Jake's hand found mine, gripping it tightly. Okay, he said quietly. I can answer questions. What followed was a long, sometimes difficult conversation. Jake's parents asked about how he knew whether he'd always felt this way, how serious we were, what this meant for his future. Some questions were easier to answer than others. Some made Jake tense with frustration at their underlying assumptions. But through it all, I could see them genuinely trying, genuinely working to understand their son in this new context. And you, Jake's mother said, turning to me, I owe you an apology. What I said at breakfast about influencing him, that wasn't fair. I was shocked and I lashed out, but that was wrong. I understand, I said sincerely. This is a lot for everyone to process. No apology necessary. It is necessary, she insisted. You clearly care about my son. I can see that in how you look at him, how you are with him. And if you make him happy, then I need to learn to be happy about that too. Jake's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You mean that? We mean it, his father confirmed. Will this be easy for us? Probably not. Will we probably say the wrong things sometimes while we're learning? Almost definitely. But we're committed to learning, to doing better, to supporting you. Both of you, his mother added, glancing at me. If you're important to Jake, then you're important to us. We'd like to get to know you better as someone our son cares about rather than just as his roommate. The relief that washed over Jake was visible. The tension draining from his shoulders as he processed his parents' words. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. Thank you for trying. That's all I needed, Jess, for you to try. His mother stood and opened her arms, and Jake went to her immediately, folding into her embrace like he was a child again. His father joined the hug, and I watched the three of them hold each other. Working through years of assumptions and the beginning of a new understanding, when they finally broke apart, Jake's father extended a hand to me. Thank you for taking care of him, for being patient while he figured things out. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of acceptance in that gesture. Thank you for raising someone worth figuring things out for. The spring sunshine filtered through our apartment windows as I worked on my laptop, jazz playing softly in the background. 6 months had passed since Jake came out to his parents. 6 months of learning and growing and building something real together. It hadn't been perfect. We'd had fights about internalized homophobia, about navigating queer spaces, about what the future looked like for two men building a life together. We'd had moments of doubt and fear, times when the weight of everything felt too heavy to carry. But we'd also had joy. So much joy. The first time Jake held my hand in public without looking around nervously afterward. The night he introduced me to his extended family as his boyfriend, not his roommate. The morning I woke up to find him watching me sleep with such open affection that it took my breath away. Space Cadet. Jake's voice cut through my thoughts as he emerged from his bedroom, though lately he'd been spending more nights in mine. Or me in his, to the point where we were discussing just officially combining our rooms. What are you thinking about so seriously? Just how much has changed, I admitted, closing my laptop. How different things are from 6 months ago. He moved behind the couch, leaning down to kiss the top of my head. Good, different, or bad different? The best different, I assured him, tilting my head back to look at him upside down. Scary sometimes, but good. Speaking of scary, he said, coming around to sit beside me, I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to run it by you before I do anything. Okay, I said cautiously, recognizing the nervous energy radiating off him. What is it? So you know how we've been talking about maybe getting a bigger place? Somewhere with more space? Maybe outside the city? He took my hand, playing with my fingers in the absent way he did when he was working up courage for something. What if we bought a place? Together. Like really together. Joint mortgage, joint ownership, the whole thing. My heart started beating faster. Jake, that's a big step. I know, he said quickly. And if it's too soon, we can wait. I love you, Ethan. I'm in love with you. And I can't imagine my future without you in it. So why not start planning that future now? It was the first time he'd said it, I love you, in those exact words. Though we'd been dancing around the sentiment for months, hearing it said directly, clearly, with such certainty, made everything else feel secondary. I love you too, I said, the words coming easily because they were so fundamentally true. And I'd love to buy a place with you, build something that's ours. His smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face with happiness and relief. Yeah, I confirmed, pulling him close and kissing him properly. Let's do it. Let's build a life together. As we sat there planning our future, our hands intertwined, and our hearts full of possibility, I thought about that night in the bathroom that had started all of this. That accidental moment of exposure that had led to the most real, authentic relationship I'd ever had. Sometimes the best things in life come from the moments we don't plan, from the accidents that force us to confront truths we've been avoiding. Jake had been my best friend, my roommate, the person I tried not to want. And now he was my partner, my future, the person I couldn't imagine being without. We still had so much to figure out: how to navigate the world as a queer couple, how to continue supporting Jake as he explored his identity, how to build the kind of life we both wanted. But we'd figure it out together, just like we'd figured out everything else, because that's what love is in the end. Not the grand gestures or perfect moments, but the daily choice to stay, to work through the hard parts, to build something beautiful from the messy, complicated reality of two people learning to love each other. And I chose Jake. Every day. In every way that mattered, I chose him, just like he chose me. The end.